Good morning, everyone. Today is the 20th of Iyar and the 11th of May. And we're holding by the fifth reading of Behar-Bechukotai when they're read together in the same Shabbat. We kind of missed yesterday, so the fourth reading is a transition between Behar and Bechukotai. So we have the beginning of Behar, of Bechukotai. And I want to take a moment to look at the first words of Parashat Bechukotai. It says, "Im bechukotai telechu vet mitzvotai tishmeru ve'asitem otam." If you walk in my commandments, in my laws. And this is a very interesting choice of verb to use, because we would usually say if you would follow, or we would say if you would keep, you would observe. But the idea that laws should be walked in is a fundamental aspect of how Judaism sees the Torah and how it sees the application of Torah. And what do I mean by this? That Judaism understands, and these were actually the last words of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who's still inspiring the rest of this week after Lag BaOmer, that the world that I'm leaving, he says, the world that I'm now leaving is like a wedding. That's what he called it. What does it mean that it's a wedding? The purpose in this world is not to sit still. The purpose in this world is like in a wedding. You should be dancing, you should be talking, you should be socializing, you should be creating connections. But more than anything, a wedding symbolizes a new start. So you should be constantly rejuvenating. You should be constantly looking for a new horizon into which to ride off into. But you don't just ride off into it, because there's a horizon after that, and after that, and so on. And so you become what the prophets call a mehalech, someone who walks, someone who is moving. Let's say something more about this idea of someone who is mehalech, someone who is constantly striving to move forward, constantly striving to change, to develop. In the book of formation, Sefer Yetzirah, we have a very important observation that each of the 12 months of the year has a particular sense to it, like we have sight and hearing and smell. The month of Nisan, if you might recall, we talked a little bit about this, is the sense of speech, of being able to speak. And we said that is related to Pesach. Pesach literally means a speaking mouth. And we said that coming out of Egypt, the main aspect of becoming free people was being able to express ourselves. That what is missing from the slave, from the person who is enslaved, is the ability to express himself. He's locked. He feels that there is no place where he can open his mouth and be heard. In fact, he can't even hear himself. He can't even speak to himself. The basis of all human development is, and what makes us different, is what you would today call backpropagation or self-reflection. The ability to listen to ourselves speaking. Because when we hear our thoughts, that's when we deepen our understanding both of ourselves and of our surroundings and everything and our environment. The next month after that, Iyar, the month that we're now in, and we're almost in the home stretch, the end of it, next week will be the end of Iyar, and Rosh Chodesh Sivan will be on next Sunday, is the sense of thought. And so we have here a very interesting progression. From being in a state of not being able to speak, in Nisan we gain the sense of speech. And speech, as we said, it allows you to deepen your thought. So it's called the sense of hirhur, which in Hebrew means deep thoughts, deep thoughts that a person has. Thoughts that are in the heart, one would say, that come from the heart. And then the month of Sivan, when the Torah is given, is called, the sense there is called the sense of walking. Hiluch, exactly like this parsha starts. Im Bechukotai teilechu. If you walk in my laws. In the month of Sivan, the month in which the Torah was given, and Torah was given on the 6th of Sivan, the 6th of the 3rd month, and it relates in its essence to the time of year in which it was given. So the Torah is what makes you from a thinker into someone who also is a walker. In other words, you could be a thinker and be detached from this world. You could not see the world. You could see it not as Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, it's not a wedding. It's not a place where you're supposed to socialize. It's not a place where you're supposed to have an impact. It's a place where you should be secluded, thinking about the ideas, deepening your understanding of yourself and others, but not advancing, not pushing the world forward, not yourself being someone who is dedicated to moving forward. And yet the Torah exactly turns the thoughts of Iyar, and like for instance the thoughts of Rashbi, of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the Zohar, and he comes and says, all that is beautiful. And you have to have that deep thinking in order to fulfill yourself. But to truly be a human being in this world, you have to be a walker. You have to be someone who is constantly advancing, who's constantly doing more, not just thinking more, but in the end doing more. So you have to first free your thought, then you have to think, but then eventually you have to apply it. You have to apply it to the world. And so says, and this parsha, the 33rd parsha of the Torah, Behar-Bechukotai, it talks about the future, the beginning, the first, what we missed yesterday, the 4th reading, and the beginning of today's 5th reading, is a description of the future. And in this description of the future, God says, you will first of all understand that your connection with the Torah cannot be a static connection. It can't be that someone is like looking at the Torah like it's some kind of rule book that was written 3,000 years ago, and it's been carbonated since then. It's like fossilized, and we just follow what it says. He says, no, you have to make the Torah apply to yourself. You have to understand how you can walk with it now. You have to make it relevant for yourself. One of the things that struck me the most when I became a chassid, and this was probably the thing that convinced me that this is the path that I want to follow, was when I first encountered in the writings of the Baal Shem Tov, well, not his writings, but what was documented from him was written down by his students, was this beautiful statement that he says, let us now look at a commandment in the Torah and ask, how is this relevant to every person at every time in every situation? In other words, he took the Torah, which seemed to be in his time to be something that, again, for lack of a better word, was like fossilized. It was like something from the past that had become irrelevant, and came and said, but I believe that the Torah is eternal. And by being eternal, it doesn't mean that you have to take it the way it was written and exactly that's the way it is now. On the contrary, you have to make it walk. You have to walk in its commandments. To walk in its commandments means to ask, how is this thing called prayer, which I do exactly maybe the way that it was done 2,000 years ago, but how is this relevant now to me, in my life, in 2023? What is that exactly? And that is the essence of what Chassidus is. That I come and take every aspect of what Torah was about, and I apply it to the things that it means to be, that trouble us or that engage us as human beings today, right now. These questions, they become the, call it the toolbox, through which we sift through the Torah and begin to unravel its true eternal essence, which means that it's applicable right now at this time. And so that's how this parsha began, and eventually it comes to Venatati Mishkani Betochachem. let's look at this statement. I actually closed the Chumash, so I have to look again where it is. It's in today's reading, the fifth reading. We're talking about Leviticus 27, verse 11. And I will place my dwelling amongst you. There's a question that asks, what's the difference between a Mishkan and a Mikdash? The difference between the Mishkan, which is usually translated as tabernacle, and the Mikdash, which is usually translated as temple. But really in Hebrew they don't mean either of these. A Mishkan means not a booth. A tabernacle is like a temporary dwelling. A Mishkan is a place of dwelling. It's where something dwells. A Mikdash is a holy place. So there's a place of dwelling and a place of holiness. What's the difference between the two of them? You can't live in a place of holiness. In a place of holiness, everything is very rigid because there's holiness there. It's like Moses encountering the burning bush and God telling him, take your shoes off because the place that you are standing on is holy ground. In holy ground you can't feel at home. In holy ground you have to feel that there is the presence of God here. That's the aspect of the Mikdash that's called the temple aspect, or the holy aspect of it, which actually freezes a person in a certain sense because there is something greater than him. There is the transcendent aspect of God above him, and he feels that. But the dwelling is exactly what this Parsha Bechukotai starts with. I will walk amongst you like one of you, says God. That is the immanent aspect of godliness. It's the aspect in which God becomes part of your life, part of your day-to-day life. There's also something that's sacred. You also have to have a mikdash, a temple. You have to have sacred space. You have to have sacred actions. But the real question is, can you also make it into, like he says here, I will place my dwelling amongst you? Can you come to this state where all the actions that you do, as the proverb says, Bechol drachecha de'eu, in all your ways, in all where you walk, you know him, you are part of him, he is part of you. And that is the aspect that this Parsha starts off with. The rest of the fifth reading is in a different direction. Maybe we'll talk about that tomorrow.